Hello. Hi. Mabuhay. Wait, you can hear me, right? Let me know in the comments if you can hear me. Um, Welcome to our first live stream of the year. Yeah, it's the first live stream of the year. Tama. Cool. So, hold on. Before I start, yeah, let us know in the chat, in the live chat and live comments where you're from. What's your name, so I can give you all the shout out. So, kung nasaan man kayo sa planet Earth, I'll be reading some of them. And then load something real quick. Welcome. How's everybody's new year? I hope everybody's having a great start of the year. Hopefully. Cool. Okay, I can hear myself. Cool. Okay, yeah. So welcome. So let me just give some few shout outs before we start. Oh, wow, there's a lot of comments already on YouTube. So if you're watching on YouTube, there's already a lot of comments in the live chat. But if you're watching on Facebook, there's not much. So if you're watching on Facebook, let us know in the chat or in the comments where you're watching from. So we have, oh, it's a lot. We have Charlie. Shout out to Charlie. Beesbulb. Krigel. Is that how you say it? Mayongo. Um, Shout out to you, Glenn Sri Yusef Baon Cueto. Sorry if I mispronounced that. Shout out to you too. Samsara 1.5 Filipino immigrant from Canada. Cool. Where in Canada you're from? What time is it there right now? Because it's already late here. Yeah. Okay, Dayang Marikit, I'm glad you're joining us today. Join the conversation. Cool, tastic. Good morning. Zoo J, hello then. Present ulit. Shade Gray, hello. Naya Diwata, hello. Kumusta? Ion Air, hello then. Hey Barbara. Hey Barbara. Hi. Okay. Cheeky Scrub, hello then. Okay. I think tardigrade. Okay. If I miss someone from the chat, I'll do more shout outs later. But yeah, hello again and welcome to our live stream today. I was actually supposed to do a video today, or I was supposed to make a formal video like I usually do, like a full 20-minute reaction slash breakdown of whatever video I'm reacting to, and but I don't have much time today. I mean, this week to make a video because I'll be visiting family. I'll be visiting my grandparents in the next coming days, so I don't have much time to make a video this week. So I decided to just do my reaction as a live stream. Cool. So sino sa inyo who have already seen the video that is kind of going viral on YouTube called "How Geography Doomed the Philippines"? Comment. I know a lot of you already have your own reactions in the chat sa YouTube. So let us know if you've seen it. Yan, sabi ni Hey Barbara, ako po. Yeah. And Dayang Marikit said she already watched it too. Naya Lauren or Naya Diwata on YouTube already watched it too. Yeah, napanood na rin ni Martin Ramos already saw it. Glenn already saw it. Yeah, marami na pala sa inyo nakapanood. So let us know your thoughts too in the comments. So I guess since I've actually already seen the ano ba yan? The video itself. I've seen it a few days ago, but kasi nga I was supposed to make a video about it. But today we'll be rewatching it. So I'll stop at certain points and we'll do a discussion. So if you have, so I guess for example, we watch the first minute and then I'll pause it and then we'll talk about it. You can send your comments or thoughts from that section about that section sa chat, sa comments, and then I'll read it off and discuss with you what I thought about it. I actually have I watched it and I have a lot of thoughts about this video. So if you look at my notebooks, I actually accidentally used two notebooks while watching the video and trying to understand what's the point of the video that we're going to be reacting to. Okay, so let me know kung ready na kayo and then we'll just go from there. Is that okay with everybody? I'll just play section by section. Maybe we'll follow his because he divided it in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sections. So maybe we'll just follow the sections in the video itself. Yeah. Okay. Ready na? Yan, ready na si Roger. Wait lang. BRB. Wala ko ng tissue. ng napkin. Yan. I made my own iced coffee kaya lang. I think I put too much ice. So watered down na siya. Okay, game. Okay, so again, we'll be watching the video. A lot of you have seen it already, so we'll be watching the video, How Geography Doomed the Philippines. We'll stop at each section and discuss what was said in the video, what was the key point, and, dig deeper and break it down. Cool. Masyado ba mataas yung camera? Because I think I'm using a different tripod. Whatever. Para na. Okay, let's start. Asan na yun? I forgot how to share screen. Okay, there we go. Share screen. Ayan. Kita na ba? Cool. So yeah, we'll watch the first, or I guess we'll watch the first 2 sections, the first 3 minutes, and then discuss.
The Philippines. As you can see, it is made up of a bunch of islands in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, over 7,000 to be specific. Being an archipelago of islands by the equator sure means it's tropical, but does that make it a paradise? I'm here to say that its geography, nature, and planet Earth has doomed the Philippines into being one of the hardest places to develop. Well, maybe not doomed per se, as the Philippines is still growing rapidly economically and population-wise, but the geography sure does not help it. What could be wrong with its location and climate to make the Philippine Islands destined to a life of pain? And how badly has geography hurt it in the past? Will the Philippines ever be able to escape its physical struggles? Funnily enough, in a video about pure geography, I'm going to talk about the demographics and history of the Philippines first, as they are truly important to understand the story of the nation. The Philippines is a very interesting place, being a mix of Southeast Asian, Austronesian, and Spanish cultures, with a little bit of American mixed in too. The first people groups to inhabit the Philippines were the Austronesians, likely sailing over from what is now Taiwan. These early Filipinos were mostly tribal hunter-gatherers and warrior societies. But look at the Philippines. It's just a bunch of islands. These early humans did not develop as a single cohesive group simply because they weren't connected. There was Chinese influence, Hindu influence, and Islamic influence spreading to different islands at different times. This version of the Philippines was a jumble of cultures and identities, the Maynílâ, Cebu, Lucos, and Sulu just to name a few. But something was brewing in Europe at the same time, and the Spanish decided to sail all the way around the world in search of gold and God. Ferdinand Magellan used this treaty to claim all of the islands in the Philippines for Spanish rule, and well, they got it. Existing tribes were now put into Spanish towns mainly to convert them to Christianity, and it worked. The Philippines nowadays is over 90% Christian, making it the only major Christian nation in Asia. And yes, there are plenty of revolts against Spanish rule, but there are no widespread revolts across the country, only small ones from individual groups at a time. But the people living under Spanish rule were still lacking an identity, other than all being Christian now. After Latin America declared independence, there was a spike of immigration to the Philippines. The Spanish term Filipino was shifted to mean everyone living in the islands instead of just the Spanish immigrants. Thus, a new identity was born, and a shared identity could mean a shared revolution. The Philippine Revolution took place 2 years before Spain and the USA had a war, and the revolution succeeded in making the first Philippine Republic, until the Americans invaded a year later. Under this rule, Tagalog became the official language of the islands, furthering a shared identity. Then during World War II, the Japanese invaded, fought a war, then left, and now the Philippines was truly for the first time united and free. The post-colonial period was full of dictators, coups, and insurgencies, but nowadays it is more or less stable. For now, because as I mentioned, the geography of this land is cursed, and it's only a matter of time before it steps in. Throughout the history of the nation, I talked a lot about this shared Philippine identity. That's because the Philippines has both simultaneously a very strong.
There you go. Cool. So that's the first part, which is about, I guess, the history, brief overview ng history ng Pilipinas. So yeah, let me know your thoughts about what you've seen so far from this video. I'll read some of the comments and then I'll share my thoughts too. Okay. What was the main point that you got from this part? I guess I just want to know what folks are thinking. What did you get? What was your takeaway from this first part of this video? I see a lot of the comments about the accent. Uh, did I read everything? Okay, cool. Oh wait, I scrolled too far. Okay. Yep. Patrick said disagree with all of his points. Arnold shared that Spanish colonialism also doomed the Philippines. Yeah. Okay. There's a lot of comments coming in too. So, okay. Naya Diwata said that literally ignored the Aita and the Ati people who inhabited the archipelago before Austronesians. Okay. Charlie's overall thought is that it's a simplified summary of our history. Yeah. Chiki said it was basic, but missed the mark with the mostly hunter gatherers, like we had other polities and trade empires. Yep. Okay. So my overall thought, well, I have a lot of thoughts again. I wrote a lot of notes. But for this part, um, he did say, some people caught it in the comments too. Some people said it in the comments how it's, the Philippines is just a bunch of islands. It was kind of said in a negative way, I guess. But I guess the whole, if you watch the whole video, it has more of a sarcastic tone, which is also a trend in some of the, in a lot of the videos on YouTube. um, um, I get that, but let's look at what was actually said in the history part. Ano ba yung mga sinabi niya? He said that there was existing tribes. So that's one terms he used. Ano ba yan? Wait lang. Wait. Where do I start? Let me see if I can just scroll over. Maybe I'll flash the screen again and see which part I want to talk about. Okay, ayan. So here he talked about how the Philippines is a diverse country with um, different people, different cultures, diverse identities. But in here he also mentioned how you know how there's a lot of influences from Austronesians and Southeast Asians, but those two are not actually what do you call this, mutually or exclusive. Because if if you actually think about it, if you look at the numbers, if you look at the vast majority of South or of Austronesians are actually in Southeast Asia. I'm not sure why there was or I kind of know why, I kind of see why he separated Southeast Asian identity from Austronesian identity, but it's presented in a way that seems like these two identities are separate from one another when they're actually overlapping. So a lot of Southeast Asians are actually Austronesians, and the vast majority of Austronesians are actually Southeast Asians. So I hope that made sense. Yeah, and then yeah, he started the whole part about the Philippines being a bunch of islands, which are just a, what was the phrase he used? It's just a bunch of islands, a jumble of culture identities. Yeah. Yeah, I have a lot of feelings about this. But, okay, sige, ano pa bang pwede natin ipakita? I guess one of the things that he did say about I guess, hold on, I'm trying to think of which one to say first. Kasi ibang thoughts ko, it's from other parts of the video. But yeah, so he mentioned how, because he was separated by different islands, because there's a bunch of islands, there's no unified identity, there's no unified culture, there's no unified, there's no development, if anything. If I'm not sure if everybody else caught that. But yeah, so there's lacking in identity, and yeah, um, but hold on, I'm trying to see what to say. So I get it. There's the bunch of different islands in the Philippines. It's very diverse, um, and wait lang, I'm trying to get into my thoughts before. Para hold on, nag-load itong isang aking. And yeah. What I'm sorry. What do you call this? What Naya said. He did not even mention the indigenous Aita, or the indigenous black people of the Philippines before Austronesian. So the common accepted theory about how the Philippines was peopled, how people humans settled the Philippines, was that the Aitas were first, before the Austronesians. Although we're not actually, it's still unclear when the Aitas actually got to the Philippines as opposed to Austronesians. Mas clear yung Austronesian part ng ating prehistory, as opposed to the Aitas. But yeah, so if folks are not familiar, I'll be surprised if people are not familiar. But some of the oldest indigenous people in the Philippines are actually the Aitas. The black people. A lot of people are unaware, especially outside the Philippines, that the oldest people living in the Philippines are actually black. Sige. Ano pa bang sinabi niya? Oh, sige. Somebody commented in the notes. Let's show that part. Sorry kung medyo magulong aking thoughts. Saan na yun? Sorry, I'm trying to find that part. Oh, there we go. Oops.
There was Chinese influence, Hindu influence, and Islamic influence spreading to different islands at different.
Okay, cool. So I guess this is what folks are referring in the comments. Yes, Glenn. There's also the Orang Asli, or the Aitas, or the similar to the Aitas in Malaysia and other parts of Southeast Asia, Melanesians. Okay. So yeah, I guess the point here was that showing that different parts of the Philippines had different influences. Like the way he presented the map is that the entire north of Luzon has very Chinese influence, and the middle is very Indian, while the south is very Muslim. And this is actually inaccurate because there's a lot of overlaps. For example, Manila was Muslim when Spaniards came to the Philippines. A lot of parts of Pampanga were Muslim. A lot of parts of Mindanao were also once Hindu Buddhist before Islam came to Mindanao. And of course, the Chinese were also present and trading with our ancestors in different parts of the Philippines. So there's a lot of overlaps. So this map is inaccurate. Yeah, and it also depends on which part of history we're looking at, which part of which period we're looking at. Because if you're looking at the 1500s, then for sure Mindanao was Muslim already. But if you're looking at before that, before the coming of Islam, if you look at 500 years before that, then Mindanao would most likely be a mix of indigenous beliefs and Hindu Buddhism. Yeah, so maraming overlaps, and yeah, even the Golden Tara here is shown as coming from the Visayas, when the Golden Tara is actually from northern Mindanao, the artifact of the Golden Tara. Yeah, so anyways, that's just a little bit about the map that was shown. There's a lot of overlap that wasn't, and I get it. This is a simplified summary of the history of the Philippines. Yeah. Sige, ano pa bang pwede natin pakita? Also, a comment on this map, since this actually went viral recently. a few months ago. This is a great map made by high school students. Although my only comment about this map is that there's no context provided. There's no kulang sa analysis for me. It's a great start for high school students. I applaud the high school students who did the research in doing this map. But when it comes to publishing maps like this, you need to show, context. Like for example, time period. Like at one point, Sulu, owns northern Sabah or northern Borneo, Sabah, and then so there's a lot of like, and then yeah, um there's a lot of like overlapping borders then, and a lot of like different stuff that wasn't shown in this map. So I think that's a comment. But yeah, this map is a great start, but it's not entirely accurate in my honest opinion. So hopefully they were able to update the map. But yeah, so it's just, oh, I guess for me, it just sucks that when you use this map without context, it seems like there's a lot of like divisions. There's a lot of like, cracks in the map when it's actually um, more complicated than that. Yeah, okay, let's move on kasi mahaba pala yung video. And then they talked about Europeans coming to Southeast Asia, which is true because of the spices. But he did say here that, when they came to the Philippines, they were looking for gold and God. But it's actually three G's: gold, God, and glory. And yeah, I guess feel free to ask questions in the comments. And if you look at this map, this part of the video where you can see how this is the or I guess what I'm trying to say is that when the Spaniards colonized the Philippines, they weren't actually in control of the entire Philippines. They were not even able to control Sulu until the Americans came. So again, maraming inaccuracies, pero it's over or a simplified version of the history. So I get it. I understand where they're coming from. But yeah, and then the Spaniards invaded, blah 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 blah, and then yeah, I guess here the comment I have here about saying that the Philippines is the only majority Christian nation country in Asia, when it's not true. East Timor is also a majority Christian country in Asia, although it's much smaller than the Philippines. So I guess yes, the Philippines is a big country that has Asian, or like a big Asian Christian country. But let's not forget that East Timor is also a country with its own Christian population. Sige. And then there was also a part in the video where he talked about the different revolts in the Philippines. How there's a bunch of smaller revolts, but never massive. What do you call this? What was the term he used? There was no widespread uprising against um, the Spaniards, which is quite true. But people are often forgetting that there was the Tondo conspiracy, for example, that actually united a bunch of different communities from Pampanga to Laguna to Batangas to Bulacan to Tondo, where it started, to Mindoro to Palawan to Sulu to Brunei. So there's a lot of again, yeah, there was a lot of revolt. There was no pan Philippine huge revolt yet, but yeah, but there's a Tondo conspiracy that also happened. And yes, Carlo B is also sharing that Indonesia also has a lot of Christian population. Yes, one of my best friends in college is an Indonesian who is Christian, Catholic. And yeah, there's a lot of the Christians also in Papua and Borneo. Yeah, and then there's also the Basi revolt that was mentioned in Ilocos, that actually almost liberated Ilocos region from the Spaniards. There's also the Bohol, the Gohol revolt in Bohol that actually was pretty much independent from Spanish colonialism for 80 years. So it's just a reminder that sure, there's not a big revolution yet, but there's a lot of successful uprisings across the country. Okay, any other comment about this part of the video before we move on? I guess I'll share more later. Um, let's see what else is. Oh, okay. So talking about um, he did mention how after the Latin American countries gained their independence from Spain, there was a lot of migration to the Philippines. There's actually not that much migration to the Philippines from the Spaniards in Latin America. There was an increase of migration, if anything, but it's not that massive to change the demography in the Philippines that much. Very maliit pa rin yung percento or percentage of Filipino or percentage of Spanish people in the Philippines overall. And it's actually and then the opposite thing happened in World War II when the Philippines was involved in World War II. A lot of the Spanish families in the Philippines migrated to Latin America. I have families who migrated to Venezuela. Um, Mostly the white side of my family migrated to Venezuela and back to Spain during World War II. But yeah, there's a lot of like nuances that were mentioned in this video, which I understand because yeah, it's a brief introduction to the history. Let me know if folks are ready to move on to the next part of the video about the people. And I'm open to comments or answering questions about this part and the history part of the Philippines. Um, oh yeah, cool. Ito. He also mentioned how the Philippine Revolution against Spain, and then the United States coming in, swooping in, taking over our sovereignty, or trampling on our independence during the Philippine American War. But yeah, ready now to move on to the next part, and we can also discuss the overall message of this video and the overall key points in the videos later. Very active ang ating chat on YouTube. I'm barely keeping up. But please, if anything, please keep the live chat lively and friendly discussion, I guess. Bawal ang away, bawal ang mga troll, bawal ang mga haters. So if you have nothing good to say about the other person, don't insult them. I guess don't attack the person. Share your thoughts. If we may disagree on some certain points, you may disagree with one another on the chat, but please do not attack each other and make it into a whole fight because people tend to do that online, but not on my channel. Let's not do that here. Okay. Anything that I missed from the history part of the video before we move on to the people part of the video? Um, yeah. So there's also a live chat happening in two places, one on YouTube and one on Facebook. Mas active in YouTube ngayon. So if you're watching on Facebook and you have questions and you have thoughts, share nyo na rin. Okay. Let's start with the people part.
I talked about European identity. That's because the Philippines has both simultaneously a very strong identity and a very weak one. Obviously, in the modern day, under the Philippine Republic, today's residents have a shared national background. They also have a semi-shared geography and are the only real Christians in their region. So in theory, the Filipino people are fairly united, but looking at their demographics shows another story. From the mishmash of various tribes and cultures, the Philippines now has over 180 ethno-linguistic groups. An ethnic map of the Philippines can show you the nature of the problem. Every group is classified as being indigenous or non-indigenous and Moro or non-Moro, with the Moro peoples being the Muslim majority groups. The Moros comprise 5% of the population, mainly in the south. The indigenous peoples are found in the interior of the islands, but are spread pretty evenly throughout the country. And the non-indigenous, non-Moro peoples, also called the Christianized groups, are found by the coasts all throughout the nations, making up 87% of the population. It is overwhelming how many ethnic groups are found in the islands, but some examples are, for the Moros, the Sulu and Palawan people, indigenous, the Lumad and Igorot, and Christianized, the Cebuano, Tagalog, and Ilocano people. Of course, this many ethnic groups means a ton of languages, and the Philippines has around 150. There wasn't even an official language until 1987 when Tagalog, later becoming Filipino, was designated so. And even though over half the population speaks either Tagalog or Cebuano, only Tagalog and English are actually taught in schools nationwide. Filipino is the language of the people, and English is the language of business in the nation, but neither is spoken by a majority of people. And that's exactly the problem. There is no one language that everyone speaks, not even close. So regional identities are extremely noticeable in the nation and are sometimes preferred to the national identity. Being physically connected would boost their national identity, of course, but there is a huge sea in between the different ethnic groups. So the Philippines is bound to be culturally separated forever. And literally, too, the Philippines is going to.
Cool. Um, yeah. So comment. Any comments about this part of the video about the people of the Philippines? Um, also, please keep the chat on topic. There are other days where we can talk about the other topics that are being brought up in the chat. Cool. Charlie said, "I think the culturally separated part is wrong." Yay! I'm glad somebody saw it. Um, yes, we were connected, always connected in some way. So I guess what I'm trying to highlight first, muna, before I go on to what Charlie's saying, um, is the part how in the video he said that the Philippines is the only real Christian country in Asia, which is not true because again, other parts of Southeast Asia are also Christian, especially East Timor is very Christian, like just like the Philippines, and other huge big populations in Indonesia are also Christian. So we shouldn't just say that the Philippines are the only real Christians in Asia. That is also very misleading. So that's my comment on that part. Um, yeah. Ano pa ba yung sinabi niya dito? Oh yeah, he talked about the different ethnicities, ethnic linguistic groups, the different languages in the Philippines. Um, yeah, what are your thoughts about this part? Let me know, and then I'll respond to your comments. I guess and throughout this part of the video, actually throughout the video, he kept bringing up the fact that there's no unified language in the Philippines. There's no one, unifying language in the Philippines. Um, that everybody spoke. So they even said that the language of business in the Philippines is English, which is true, and Filipino Tagalog is supposed to be the language of the people. Um, and in the daily conversation, which is also true. But he said that nobody in the entire country speaks both. So medyo misleading yon. Um, yeah, so it's true that there's a bunch of languages in the Philippines, over 180 languages according to ethnologue.com, the one the website that tracks the languages who are that are being used in the different countries. So in the Philippines, there's over 100, if I'm not mistaken, 186 or 187 languages as of today in the Philippines. Um, yeah, but guess what Gilbert's comment is saying? Like, how do we define a unified language? So um, so yes, the Philippines is not a monolingual country because again, there's multiple languages, but that has never been a problem actually in the Philippines. Um, he mentioned how again, yun nga sabi niya, not everybody spoke Tagalog or Filipino, or not everybody spoke English. But the thing is, those two are actually being taught throughout the Philippines, and actually, it may not be the first language of the entire country. It may not be the first language of the vast majority of the Philippines, but I'm pretty sure a lot of you would agree. I already saw some comments about this that a lot of the majority of the people in the Philippines have a basic understanding of Filipino or Tagalog and have a basic understanding of English, which is why the TV shows in the Philippines are all in like Taglish. So it is true that not everybody spoke English or Tagalog or Filipino as their first language, but it doesn't mean that there's this um, lack of unifying language. Because again, English and Tagalog, for the better part of the last century, have been the lingua franca of the Philippines, not just in business, not just in government, but even in media. And there's the Taglish version of it, and we can get on, go on and on and on about the issues of languages in the Philippines. But the thing is, It's not true that we don't understand it. Kasi parang pinapakita niya na we don't understand each other, but that's not true. Again, there's comments earlier that let me just read some of the comments. Asan na yun? Ay, nawala. Sabi niya, marunong kaya kami mag-Filipino, mga Bisaya, taga Mindanao. So people in Mindanao and Visayas region can speak Filipino or Tagalog, but sometimes they get shy. They get embarrassed because of their accent, because of their strong accent when they speak Tagalog. So they're not used to it. That's what they're saying on the comment, which is true. And the sad thing is that a lot of people from places like Manila would actually make fun of Visayans trying to speak Tagalog, or people from Mindanao trying to speak Tagalog, which is unfair. Kasi nga, even though Tagalog is a national language, it doesn't mean that we should ignore or what do you call this? Discriminate on the other languages. Because if you think about it, a Cebuano can speak Bisaya or Cebuano, a branch of Visayan language, can speak English, can speak Tagalog, and that's just 3. And who knows if they can also speak Waray or Hiligaynon, that's 5. So sometimes we make fun of people who can actually speak more language than us. So sadly, the mainstream media in the Philippines also kind of perpetuate the stereotype of making fun of people who have accents. Cool. So yes, there's over 187 or over 180 languages in the Philippines, and hundreds or over 100 ethno-linguistic groups, but it doesn't mean that we don't understand each other. And I guess my point here too is that alam mo yun, throughout the video, it's presenting as if not having a unifying one language means that we're culturally divided, when it's not true. Or I guess what I'm trying to say is that in the video, it's pointing towards how having multiple languages is a problem, and it's not, because being a multilingual country actually is an advantage. And I'll get more of my thoughts later. But yeah, nabubulol na ako. Cool. So keep on sending your comments, or if you have questions or comments about specific parts, since right now we're talking about the people. Then we'll go on. Let me know kung ano pa ba pwede natin ipakita dito. Also, let me give a comment on this part. So the video also talked about the different people in the Philippines. So here, ito muna yung natin. So what do you see? what are you seeing in the screen? Comment. What did you get in this part of the video when he talked about the indigenous, non-Christian indigenous people and the indigenous Moro people? Comment, and I'll read some of your comments before I share my thoughts. Okay, hold on. This is a comment from earlier. Yeah. So who made that video? Trying to have multiple languages, but they are united. Yes, exactly. So other countries are also multilingual. India, for example, is very multilingual, more languages than the Philippines. Indonesia has, more than twice as our languages in the Philippines. And yeah, and they have the motto in Indonesia, the national motto in Indonesia is unity in diversity. Bhinneka Tunggal Ika is how they say it in Bahasa. Okay, so here, the comment he was saying in this part is that there's three major groups of people in the Philippines: the non-Christian indigenous people, the indigenous Moro, the Muslims, and Christianized non-indigenous people. So a little comment here. I know this is kind of could be a very controversial topic for a lot of people. What I'm trying to say is that, where am I going with this? It's in the video. It's saying that the majority of the people in the Philippines are non-indigenous, but that's actually wrong. So there's actually it depends on the context. Again, one of my big comment overall in this video is that it lacks context. It did not give enough context for someone to actually understand what's going on in the Philippines, or the situation in the Philippines. So let's give some context about the term indigenous. So technically, if we look at the bare definition of what indigenous means, Kapampangas are indigenous, Tagalogs are indigenous to the Philippines. Cebuanos are indigenous to the Philippines. All the Christian ethnic groups in the Philippines are also indigenous to the Philippines. So that's from a cultural and ethnic ethnicity perspective, they're all indigenous to the Philippines. But when it, or ethno-linguistic perspective, but when it comes to political context, um, there's the what some people would spell indigenous with a capital I. So these are the marginalized communities like the Ifugaos in the Cordilleras, the Ati people, the Aitas in Central Luzon, the Lumad in Mindanao. So these are all indigenous with a capital I. So they're politically, what do you call this? From a political context, they're marginalized. They don't have as much power, as much voice, or as much economic um, opportunities as the Christianized ethnic groups in the Philippines. So that's to give you a context then. So technically, all of them are indigenous to the Philippines. The Kapampangas are as much indigenous to the Philippines as much as the Magindanaoans. Actually, Kapampangas and Magindanaoans have a lot of culture or shared culture to one another, even though they're on opposite part of the Philippines and have two entirely different religions. Kapampangas are devoutly Catholic now, and the Magindanaoans are devoutly Muslim. But if you look at the traditional flags of Mindanao and Kapampangan, they're the same colors. Fun fact. But yeah, I can make a. I'm actually planning to make a video about defining what's indigenous, because it depends on the context again. But yeah, just a little comment on this part since actually this was a comment or a part that was asked. That one of my followers and viewers have asked me in the past. Okay. Um, yeah. So again, language having multiple language does not mean that it's or it's not good for the country. Okay, there's a lot of comments I'm missing. So yeah, linguistically speaking, everybody can understand, or majority of people in the Philippines can understand Tagalog or English as their second language. Just because, just because it's not their first language, it doesn't mean that it's not a unifying language, of anything, or it's not something that everybody understands. Okay, let's move on to the second part. Okay.
And literally, too, the Philippines is going to be separated forever. The Philippines is, after all, a chain of islands, but so are plenty of other nations. Why is the Philippines specifically doomed? It's fairly simple. It is this very geography that has kept the Filipinos separated, not just through the islands, but through its terrain and climate, too. The Philippines is made up of around 7,600 islands, yet only 11 make up 95% of the landmass, with two, Luzon and Mindanao, making up a third. Like its cultures, it's very hard to talk about a single feature that all these islands share.
Okay, just one comment really quick. It's 7,641 islands as of the recent study from the government. Officially, 7,641 islands.
Most of them are mountainous, mainly along the eastern side, running with the Philippine Trench. But many singular spicy mountains stand alone on different islands. These mountains further separated the Philippine tribes, creating pockets of distinct cultures. Humans generally don't like to make civilizations in valleys, plateaus, and mountains, unless, of course, they are right by rivers, of which the Philippines has a distinct lack of. The longest river in the nation is only 500 kilometers long on its largest island, Luzon, which compared to most other major rivers is child's play. Therefore, in order for the native people groups and later the colonizers to interact with each other, they would need to either travel along the coasts or somehow make the journey through the highlands of the center, and the journey was not easy. Because the Philippines sits near the equator, it is mostly made up of overgrown tropical rainforest and swampy mangroves along the coast, although in the northern highlands there is a small section of temperate land. So the easiest thing was to develop on the coasts, meaning a lack of infrastructure in the interior where most of the farming and mining of the nation can actually be done. It also means a lack of a highway or railway system to connect the nation together, but I guess that could have been obvious. So the physical geography from the hot, humid jungles, valleys, and plenty of islands did not help unify the nation, but divide it apart. And still, That's not even the biggest geographic challenge the Philippines faces.
Okay, oh no, I think my camera is having a glitch. Let me just turn it off really quick. Yeah, is it still? Yeah, great. Okay, now. Okay, comments about this part on geography part and the physical geography of the Philippines. Okay, I'll highlight some of your comments. Can you still hear me? I think my camera stopped working. Oh no, my camera is really not working. Uh, you can still hear me, right? Even though you cannot see my face. Okay, sige, since you cannot really see me anyway, comment if you can hear me, because I'm not sure if you can actually hear me. Yeah, so, okay, sorry, pasensya na. Ang daming tech difficulties. Masa na yung, the things I want to highlight is, you know, the river. So he commented, his major point here is that um, there was no development in the Philippines in terms of, civilized societies because there's no major rivers. So a lot of the development happened in the coastal area. So there was no major development because of the lack of a major river in the Philippines. But the thing is, when you compare the longest river in the Philippines to the Mississippi River, for example, in North America, or the Nile River in Egypt, in Africa, then it's, to say the least, it's out of context and very um, simplified. I'm trying to choose my words wisely, pero mali. In short, sa Tagalog, mali. Mali na ikumpara ang Mississippi River um, compared to the rivers in the Philippines. So again, of course, the Philippines is an archipelago, so there won't be a river the size of the Mississippi River, or the size of the Nile River, or the size of the Yangtze River. But the thing is, there's actually a lot of rivers in the Philippines. If you actually look at the 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 Pampanga River in Central Luzon, all the tributaries, all the little branches of the Pampanga River in Central Luzon it's a lot. So just because we don't have a major river like the Yangtze, or the Mekong River, or the Nile River, it doesn't mean that development did not happen. It doesn't mean that, you know again, we have a lot of coast, so we don't. The rivers are also, well, they're both important because they naman fresh water yung sa sea. But yeah, my point is, it's not fair to compare a small river system in the Philippines, or a short river in the Philippines, to some of the largest rivers in the world. It's like saying that, let's compare the coastline of the Philippines to the coastline of United States. Then the coastline of the United States would be child's play compared to the coastline of the Philippines, which is more than 2 times longer than that of the United States. Um, Yeah. Okay, let me see if my camera can start working again. Not sure why it's not working. Ayaw pa rin. But yeah, interested to hear more of your thoughts before I share more of my own thoughts. Okay. Yes, it's not fair to compare those rivers. Yes, there's also the Pulangi River in Mindanao. There's a lot of rivers in the Philippines actually. They're not big, but there's actually a lot of smaller but interconnected rivers in the Philippines. Pasig River in Manila, for example, is also big. I like this comment from um, illustration PH. Why need a river when you have a whole ocean? Yes, but we still need river, of course, as a source of fresh water. But yes, it's unjust to compare massive rivers with the smaller rivers in the Philippines. Okay, let's see. Ayaw pa rin gumana ng camera. Okay, I guess we'll just keep going. Um, okay, here. May comment ako nakita kanina about this part. Asan na yun? Did I start? Yan, sabi ni MJ Gando, the Pan-Philippine Highway. So he's saying that there's no major highway that connects the Philippines from north to south or the entire archipelago. That's actually not true. Even though there's the sea dividing the different islands in the Philippines, there's actually a way for you to drive from Ilocos, north of the Philippines, up here, drive this way, down this way, then to Central Luzon, to Manila, to Southern Tagalog, to Bicol, and then go on a ferry, and then hop off of the ferry when you reach Samar, and then Leyte, and then get on another ferry, go to Mindanao, all the way to Zamboanga down here, and it's called the Pan Philippine Highway. And it was actually for those. A lot of people would associate the Pan Philippine Highway with President Marcos, but actually it was just Dada Macapagal who started the Pan Philippine Highway, who envisioned this Pan Philippine Highway from north to south of the Philippines. Just history fun fact. But yes, there's actually a highway that connects. Let me actually see how the route works. Yeah, let's see if I can pull up a map. Yeah, merong mapa sa Wikipedia. So let's show that map really quick. Ayan, so if you can see the map, you can literally drive from Ilocos down to Cagayan, to Isabela, to Nueva Vizcaya, Nueva Ecija, Pampanga, Bulacan, Metro Manila, Laguna, Quezon, Camarines Norte, Camarines Sur, Albay, Sorsogon, and then to Samar, and then to Leyte, and then to um, the Caraga region, and then Agusan, Surigao, Davao, Cotabato, um, Lanao, and then Zamboanga. So you can actually drive this, y'all. There's it just because there's no continuous land highway, it doesn't mean that these highways are not connected. There's also what we call, yung is it? I'm not sure what they call it nowadays, but yung Roro, is that how you say it? Roro ports. When you hop on a ferry to go to the next destination with your car, right? Yung Roro. So yeah, you can actually drive. Ayaw pa rin gumana ng ating mahiwagang webcam. Bakit? Can you still hear me, y'all? Okay, let's just continue watching the video, and we'll share more of the thoughts later. Sige. Since ay gumana ng camera ko. Cool. Let's move on to the physical geography part.
Let me give you a small lesson in earth science. When two tectonic plates rub past each other, the relatively small force compared to the plate creates a relatively massive force when you live on that same plate. And there's no more notorious tectonic activity than in the Ring of Fire. This is a ring of tectonic plates around the Pacific Ocean, which has created ring-shaped patterns of earthquakes, mountains, and volcanoes. The Philippines sits right in the middle of the Ring of Fire, getting absolutely shafted by tectonic activity. Earthquakes in the Philippines are a regular occurrence. On average, the nation receives a magnitude 7 earthquake yearly. Not only do deaths happen, but it also costs billions and billions of dollars to repair the costs done by the earthquake. The strongest so far occurred in 1976 near the Moro Gulf. Sure, there are plenty of other regions who deal with earthquakes, but there's simply more coming at the Philippines than those other nations. Second, because of its tropical location with an ocean to the west, the Philippines has a regular typhoon season, destroying many coastal settlements and development. The worst one being Typhoon Haiyan in 2013, costing $2 billion in damage, and the 10 other costliest typhoons all happened within the last 10 years. It is not a cheap or healthy occurrence for a nation to have to rebuild itself every year. The seismic activity and low-lying land also causes mudslides and flooding, destroying even more land. Forest fires rage on yearly in the dense rainforest, prone to lightning from the heavy rain. But hey, at least these mountains won't cause any issues.
With MailChimp, you can design more engaging marketing assets in no time at all.
Wala palang audio. Ayan, meron ng audio. So when the camera is working, the audio is not working. Okay, yeah, meron ng audio. Okay, so he's saying that he mentioned that um, the Ring of Fire. Okay, so that he said he's sorry, got off track. Okay, you can hear me now. Okay, let me backtrack. So he's saying that the Philippines is part of the Ring of Fire, and yes, we are part of the Ring of Fire. There's a lot of volcanoes, a lot of tectonic activities, a lot of earthquakes in the Philippines. And he said something about sure, it's not just the Philippines, that other countries, specifically the flags that you saw in Japan, also experience earthquakes. Not just the Philippines, and Chile also experience earthquakes. Those are the two flags that he showed earlier, apart from the Philippines. But he did say that the Philippines, most earthquakes are like there are more earthquakes that attack or that come at the Philippines compared to the other countries, but that's actually not true. So if you look at the data of earthquakes from ano sila yung USGIS babe. Let me double check my acronym. USGS.com or .gov. So if you look at the US government's own tracking of earthquakes around the world, that tracks the Ring of Fire, or in particular, or actually around the world, the country that has the most recorded earthquakes every year is actually Japan, not the Philippines. But that's because Japan also has the most advanced technology in terms of tracking earthquakes, so they can record more of the earthquakes compared to other countries. So the most recorded, because they have the technology to record it, is Japan. But if you actually look at the most number of earthquakes that happens in a country, it's actually Indonesia. So not the Philippines. So the most recorded earthquakes are in Japan because they can track it. But if you actually look at you know, the seismic activity in Indonesia, there's more seismic or earthquakes happening in Indonesia, not Japan. So those two are the top, in terms of numbers of earthquakes happening every day or every year. Japan and Indonesia are the top, not the Philippines. That's because I'm saying not the Philippines because in the video he said that it's the Philippines, but not. And also, what do you call this? So those are the, Indonesia and Japan has the most earthquakes in terms of numbers. But if you look at the most catastrophic earthquakes, the most destructive earthquakes that happens every year, um, it's not the most destructive catastrophic earthquakes happen not in the Philippines, not in Japan, not in Indonesia, but in Iran and China. So if you look at the data, the science, um, physical geography, most earthquakes happen in Japan and Indonesia on this part of the Ring of Fire, dito sa atin. But the most destruction or the most catastrophic earthquakes happen not in this part of the world, but actually in Iran and China. And a runner-up to that is actually Turkey. So the top three countries that has the most destructive earthquakes throughout every year is actually China, India. I mean, not India, China, Iran, and Turkey, not Japan, not the Philippines, not Indonesia. So in the video, he's trying to paint that the Philippines experience a lot of these, terrible earthquakes. Well, true, we do have a lot of earthquakes in the Philippines, but they're not as catastrophic as other countries. So yeah, just want to point out that the science and the data tells us otherwise than what was presented in the video. Okay, another, sige, play pa natin siya.
Earthquakes in the Philippines are a regular occurrence. On average, the nation receives a magnitude of dollars to repair the costs done by the earthquake. The strongest so far.
Yes, the strongest was
There
in
are
the
plenty
Moro
of
Gulf.
other regions
Okay.
who deal with earthquakes,
You
but
talked
there's
about
simply
this.
more coming at the Philippines typhoon season,
Okay,
destroying
typhoon.
many coastal settlements and development. The worst one being Typhoon Haiyan in 2013, costing $2 billion in damage. And the 10 other costliest typhoons all happened within the last 10 years. It is not a cheap or healthy occurrence for a nation to have to rebuild itself every year. The seismic activity and low-lying land also.
Okay. Pause muna natin dyan. So he talked about typhoons. Let's go back to the typhoons. Okay. Typhoons in the Philippines. Yes, the average typhoons or storms in the Philippines is, what do you call this? It's 20, at least 20 every year. We get 20 typhoons every year in the Philippines. And a lot of them are, in the last couple of years, as he also pointed out here, it's true that a lot of them have been very destructive. So the last, the costliest in terms of damages economically and monetarily, the costliest Philippine typhoons happened in the last 10 years, from 2010 to or 2008. Um, yeah, so of course the biggest one is Typhoon Yolanda or Haiyan, and then Typhoon Pablo, Glenda, um, all these typhoons. But what I want to point out here is that if you look at it, that these data of the costliest typhoons, the most deadliest typhoons in the Philippines, uh, did happen in the last 10 years, but that's not because, or that's mostly because of climate change. Let's just um, let's just say it out there. And yes, of course, there's Odette that is not in this chart, and Odette has been very destructive. And if I'm not mistaken, it's second to Typhoon Haiyan in terms of costly destruction in the Philippines and damages that was caused in the Visayas region in Mindanao. But yeah, okay, and we'll go back to this parts later. Let's just keep watching the video first.
Last 10 years. It is not a cheap or healthy occurrence for a nation to have to rebuild itself every year. The seismic activity and low-lying land also causes mudslides and flooding, destroying even more land. Forest fires rage on yearly in the dense rainforests, prone to lightning from the heavy rain. But hey, at least these mountains won't cause any issues.
Oops, I know a lot of people are not actually happy with that explosion. I saw the comments, they don't like that. But yeah, anyways, he talked about the destruction, having to rebuild every year. It's not I agree with that part of the video. It's not sustainable. It's not good for a country like the Philippines. You have to spend billions of dollars to rebuild every year, only to be destroyed again the following year. But then I'll talk more about what can be done later. Um, let's actually, we already saw this part, because now he's talking about the volcanoes. Um, did he talk about the fire again? Oh, not yet. Okay, so I just want to go back really quick to the fire. He did. I'm not sure if it's in this part, but in the video, somewhere in the video, he talked about forest fires in the Philippines being a common occurrence, a common natural disaster in the Philippines. Um, so if you actually look at the data, because I look at the data of the forest fire alerts in the Philippines, or in the last year from February 2021 to January this month of 2022, in the last 12 months, there has been 471 forest fires that were alerted or recorded in the Philippines. So let me put that in the banner. 471 forest fires in the Philippines in um, the last 12 months. It seems like a lot, but if we if we compare that to, for example, um, in the U.S., where I am in the United States, the average, or not the average, in the last 12 months, the forest fires that was recorded in the U.S. is actually 39,646. So who can do the math? Sinong gusto mag, I'll do my calculator. So sa US, there's 39,646. Then you take out 471 from the Philippines. That's 39,175 more fires that happens in the US than in the Philippines. And then, out of that 39,000 in the US, 15,000, almost half of the forest fires in the US happens where I am here in California. So if a forest fire you know, is a cause of doom, it would be California that is really doomed, not the Philippines in terms of forest fires. So parang exaggerated yung pagkakabanggit ng forest fire sa Pilipinas. I'm not saying that it's not happening in the Philippines, but it's not as bad as it is here in California. And actually, at the end of the video, I noticed that the person who made this video is from Canada. In Canada, there's actually 26,000 forest fires happening in Canada. So just to give you a picture in terms of numbers of forest fires, he mentioned that forest fires are a big problem in the Philippines. Not as big as if you compare other countries or even a state like California.
Volcanoes, though, are one of the Philippines' biggest threats. There have been 2 literal extinction events from the Philippine volcanoes before humans walked on this earth. The deadliest and most infamous being the eruption of Mount Pinatubo in 1991. 20,000 people needed to be evacuated just from the lahar flow alone, a mix of hot ash and mud flooding the land. There is massive destruction in the surrounding area and ash coverage which reached Thailand. And there have been hundreds of other eruptions like it throughout history. The early people groups of the Philippines were not nearly as prepared as the modern Philippines is now, so whenever a major natural disaster happened, it could have literally ended their culture.
Okay, I'll end here. Okay, thoughts, people on the chat? Ay, ganyan. Yan. Okay, he talked about volcanoes. There is a lot. There is a lot of volcanoes in the Philippines. I forgot the exact number of volcanoes in the Philippines, but I did make a video about it a few years ago, a 2-part video on volcanoes in the Philippines. So if you want to look it up, it's on my YouTube channel from 2019 or 2018. I forgot which year. But anyways, the point here is that the biggest geological or geographical problem that dooms the Philippines is also the earth. I mean the volcanoes. That's also because of the Pacific Ring of Fire. But yeah, what people are saying in the comments, Indonesia has its fair share of volcanic activity. That's why there's also a lot of earthquakes in Indonesia, and same with Japan. So it's not like a unique problem to the Philippines. A lot of these countries, from Indonesia to the Philippines to Japan, have the same problems because we are all again lined up along the Pacific Ring of Fire. And yes, what Gilbert is saying, volcanoes are still needed for agriculture. So in the video, he's saying that this destructive volcano eruption can destroy the culture and the civilizations in the Philippines. But the point, or the thing that the point that he kind of missed in this part of the video is that um, volcano is also very important to agriculture. So a lot of the volcanic areas in anywhere in the world are the most fertile lands in the world. That's where you can grow a lot of crops. For example, in Central Luzon, the Central Luzon has the most, if not the most, one of the most, if not the most fertile region in the Philippines. There's a lot of crop cycles that you can do in Central Luzon throughout the past thousands of years, and that's because of the volcanic activity of Pinatubo. On Arayat, once upon a time, was also a volcano. So there's volcanoes are not necessarily destructive in terms of in this context. What I'm trying to say too is that if you look at archaeology in the Philippines, according to the National Museum of the Philippines, the archaeologists from UP, from the National Museum of the Philippines, particularly Dr. Eusebio Dizon, who did the archaeological research, the most foremost archaeologists in the Philippines. According to their research, prehistoric prehistoric people in the Philippines in Luzon tend to follow the volcano. So if you look at their research, so for example, they would settle the same group of people, the ancestors of what are now the Kapampangan Tagalog-speaking people. They would, or particularly the Kapampangan people, according to their research, they would settle, for example, in around Pampanga, around Pinatubo. And then when Pinatubo erupts, they move down south to near Taal, and then when Taal erupts, they move back to Pinatubo. So there's a lot of movement, and then they're following um, 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 they're following the cycle of the volcano. So whenever a volcano would erupt, they would simply move, and then come back, because again, after it erupts, the land would be fertile. I mean, it's very I'm giving an overly simplified version of this prehistory, but it is normal to have a volcanic activity in the Philippines, um, and it's not that dooming or damning for the Philippines. It is not a curse to the Philippines. It's actually a blessing in many ways to have this many volcanoes, because of the many nutrients, the many resources just volcanic activity actually produces in the land. Yes, so early people in Batangas thrive around the lake because of because the volcano also thought it can problems, but it also raises civilizations. And somebody mentioned in the comments earlier, I kind of lost it now, but somebody mentioned Bali. Yes, Bali, Indonesia also has a lot of volcanoes, and look at their culture; it's very thriving. Yeah. But yeah, so very oversimplified. But although he did mention Pinatubo, and I've personally experienced Mount Pinatubo's eruption in 1991. 91 ba yun? I was 3 years old, so it should be 91. But yeah, yes, Asian toast. It is this video that you're talking about. Yeah, I'll share more of my thoughts later. So yeah, let's keep going.
And when you live in this region, a major natural disaster is going to happen pretty often. As the Earth's climate changes at a rapid pace from human activity, some of these major natural disasters will only happen more often. The typhoons, forest fires, droughts, and flooding will only speed up. Luckily, earthquakes and volcanoes are fairly unaffected by climate change, which have generally been the worst disasters in Philippine history. Their main two issues from climate change seem to be too much water and too little water. Water is probably the most important resource on this planet, specifically fresh water. All the food we eat needs water to be produced. Currently, the Philippines has a dry season and a wet season. In the future, there will only be a drier dry and wetter wet season. During the dry season, where 1/3 of the Filipino population works in agriculture, water will be scarce, with droughts predicted to ravage the nation. But during the wet season, it's expected that extreme rainfall in the north and center will essentially flash flood many settlements. There will be extreme days with less than 2.5 millimeters of rain and some with over 300 millimeters of rain. Temperatures will also rise around 3 degrees, making some days reach 35 degrees in the Philippines, where the average temperature is already around 26 degrees and stays relatively the same annually. The water won't just fall on them, it'll rise up too. Sea levels are predicted to rise around half a meter in the Philippines. The Philippines is already extremely volatile to any change in sea level due to being an extremely coastal nation because they couldn't live in the centers of the islands. The Philippines will have a future where water is both in short supply and their worst enemy. The Philippines is such a
Okay. Comments. Let's ano ba yan? There's a lot in my head right now. But there's a point earlier where he talked about volcano eruptions, how people in the Philippines. I guess one of my comments here too, not just when it comes to volcanoes, but also typhoons and floodings. There's a comment there's a statement he made earlier that people in the Philippines today are more prepared to face these disasters compared to the people back then, our ancestors pre-colonially. But that's actually, in my opinion, that is not actually entirely accurate. Because even though we have all these technology available to us today, if you think about it, if you study how our ancestors responded to the calamities, responded to the volcanic eruptions, responded to typhoons, they're actually more sustainable compared to us. The architecture of our ancestors alone were very um, you know resilient to typhoons and these natural disasters. A lot of, again, yes, like what Ari said, there's a lot of misconceptions about natural disasters that were presented in the video. um, yeah, so yeah, if you ask me, our ancestors were actually more aware and more prepared in dealing with mother nature compared to us today. And actually, and if you think about it, a lot of the worsening typhoons, the worsening floodings are the cause of, one, climate change, and two, because we've neglected mother nature. If you think about it, so even though we have more advanced technology to address these problems, we also have neglected mother nature for the last couple of centuries, which leads us to where we are today with worsening typhoons, worsening floodings. Yeah. Yes. So like what Ari's saying, it's not all just black and white, but more of a lot of gray areas. Yes. Okay. Let's just finish the video and then I'll answer. Or we'll talk more.
area of the world. It doesn't really fit in anywhere. It's not entirely Asian, not entirely Western, and not entirely Austronesian. It is a blend of all these cultures plus significant Hindu and Islamic influences to make a society like no other. Unfortunately, Mother Nature already had that same plan, making the Philippines an archipelago of separated islands covered in mountainous rainforests to stop the early humans from interacting with each other. And with disaster after disaster costing billions and countless lives every year, the modern Philippines still struggles with fighting nature. They will only have to keep fighting more as climate change keeps sending more and more disasters their way. Yet, the Philippines have prevailed through foreign rule and all of these disasters before, so maybe the nation isn't doomed, just at least cursed by geography.
Okay, so that's the end of the controversial video. Okay, comments. There's a lot of comments, but yeah, going back to what he was saying about um, that maybe we're more equipped in fighting Mother Nature. But the thing is, that's the whole concept that I'm trying to share, or trying to say, is that that this guy kind of missed, or not kind of, but really missed in the video, is that the way he presents it is that people are fighting Mother Nature, when in fact it should be the other way around. If you're getting what I'm trying to say. um, what I'm trying to say is that we shouldn't be looking at it as us fighting Mother Nature to survive, but actually taking care of Mother Nature to survive. That's how our ancestors saw Mother Nature. They saw it as part of their life, as something they need to take care of, and not something to take advantage of, not something to be neglected. So yeah, cool. Okay, um, I have a lot of thoughts, but comments. Okay, I'll read some of the comments. Middle San said, talking too fast. Sorry. I tend to talk fast sometimes, or a lot of times. Sorry. Attention na. I'll try to slow down. Okay. Um, okay. So like I said earlier in the beginning of the live stream, if you missed it, I've seen this video before today. So I actually wrote down an outline of what I want to do, because I was actually supposed to make a video about it, a full 20-minute, animated video of me talking about the key points that he said in this um, video. So yeah, um, I had that planned, but I'll be traveling this week. Tomorrow, diba? I think. Wait, no, a day after tomorrow. I'll be traveling to see family, spend time with my grandparents this week. So I won't be able to make that video yet. But I would like, so I ended up doing a live stream today. But I'm still planning on actually making a formal 20 something minute video, breaking down the key points presented in this video to educate people. Because it's hard when there's a lot of like information or data that are taken out of context. It creates this doomsday scenario, or doomsday um, you know presentation of what the situation in the Philippines is. um, but yeah, I'm interested to read more of your comments. Yes, so comment from Batala. Oh, si Batala nandito. Batala says, I say it's corruption and poor planning that leads us to such a hard situation today. Poor spending of government funds, true, for disaster and preparedness, and also we messed up in the mountains that supposed to protect us. Yes, so yes, again, tama si Batala, a lot of the worsening conditions of our natural disasters in the Philippines are not entirely because of Mother Nature, but because of our neglect of Mother Nature and corruption in the way we manage our resources. Yeah. Okay. I think I missed a lot of comments. Okay, hello Joseph, welcome. Okay, so ano ba yung mga comments na nabasa ko? Again, he mentioned forest fires. Yes, forest fires are part of the cycle of Mother Nature. But then it's getting worse, especially here in California. But the way he presented in the videos, it's as if the Philippines is like California, suffering from forest fires. Yeah. Anyways, again, I'll be making a more formal video about this, um, from a perspective of a historian. And actually, for those who may not know, who may not be aware, so apart from studying history and ethnic studies in college, geography was actually one of my favorite subjects. It's actually one of my strengths in college. Lalo na yung branches of cultural geography, historical geography, political geography, and environmental geography. Those are my some of my top favorite college courses subjects that I studied in college. So yeah, I'm excited to actually make that more formal video about this. Yeah, so please stay tuned for that. It's not going to come out this week because I'll be spending time with family, but maybe next week I'll have that video ready. Um, you know, breaking down this video into a more understandable, more accurate way. Yes, so sabi ni Bathala, just look at Japan. They managed to cope with the environment and spent their money on building infrastructure that will lessen the amount of destruction. That is true. Sunward Shin, thank you. I really like your content. Keep it up. Thank you. I'll try my best. I'll do my best and do better this year. I'll be doing more live stream like this if you're all interested. Okay. Just a reminder, keep the live chat friendly and engaging, not don't fight in the live chat. It's okay to disagree, but just don't pick a fight. Okay, Shade Gray saying that my fear with that video is that Filipinos will watch it and expect doom instead of holding politicians and other people in power for the lack of proper response and preparation to disasters. Yes, yes, that's also one of my fears, is that when you watch this video, it seems like that's just what's gonna happen. It's just the way it is, but it's not. So, as a people, especially this coming election, we need to make we need to hold our politicians, our leaders accountable, and elect leaders who can actually address the needs of our country, of our people, of our islands, who can actually have a better vision of what's happening in the country, not just those who enrich their pockets. And yeah, okay, sige. Carlo Bees is saying volcanoes actually combat global warming since it causes global cooling. I'm not saying that there's these or that there should be more eruptions, but they do create more land and more fertile soils. And all of this combat rising water levels and global warming. So it is a cycle. So yeah, so what do you think about his comment about no language dominating the islands? Again, I mentioned earlier that just because there's no language that everybody spoke as their mother tongue, and a unified language, it doesn't mean, or having multiple languages has never been a hindrance to the development. It has never been a hindrance to being civilized. Kasi medyo napaka simple and narrow minded if we say that just because we don't have a unifying language or dominating language in the islands, that's how the different diverse people of the Philippines are culturally separated forever, for eternity. I think that's what he said. But yeah, yes, Japan is not perfect. That is true, but in terms of coping with natural disasters, they're doing better than the Philippines. But also because they have more resources. But it doesn't excuse us for not, for our, does not excuse our leaders for, um, not doing their jobs. Actually, okay. But Hala is saying, true, the video seemed to put prejudice on the idea that we're doomed to fail just because of our geographical position, yet failed to relay the message that it's part of the nature cycle, and we, as Filipinos, find ways to deal with it. Yeah, very, uh, very prejudicial. Yeah, yung video. Or it's a very narrow understanding of geography. Because if you study geography, you also study how people respond to it, how people, through the years have responded to it and have adapted to it. Um, okay, hold on. We have maybe we have a half an hour more in this stream before I go off. So yeah, Calorie is saying in many ways, we are actually more fortunate than Japan. We have more natural resources and a much more stable climate. Yeah. Yeah, so there's a lot of overly simplistic narrative that was presented in the video. Um, um, yeah, so maybe the person who made the video is just not as aware. So I encourage the person. I'm not sure what their name is, but I encourage him to to dig deeper, because not everything is black and white. Not everything is what you see on the surface. Just because a country has too many volcanoes or earthquakes, it doesn't mean that it's doomed. Also, in the video, he said that Filipino as a national language was only that we did not have a national language until 1987. That's because of the Constitution giving Tagalog Filipino, but that's not true. Tagalog was chosen to be the basis of the national language as early as 1935, right? Let me double check my year. Under because it was under President Quezon. Okay. Anyways, yeah, it's yes. We should learn each other's languages. Yes. And I would have to agree with this one. The problem is that our constitution gives preferential treatment to the Tagalog language in the guise of being called the Filipino language, the national language, at the expense of other local languages. It is sadly true. And I actually made a video about this too a few years ago, 2018, I think. So if you want to learn more, it's in my channel. Okay, Anthony Rivera is saying that a non-Filipino assuming that having multiple languages as a barrier is not. It was a bit shallow to assume that. Yeah, yes, it is not a barrier because a lot of countries actually. Let's just give examples of other countries in the world that has many languages, not just the Philippines. So again, in the comments, a lot of people have mentioned India, China, Indonesia has more than twice our languages. Even countries, like Spain, they actually have a lot more languages in Spain than Spanish. The Spanish language we call Spanish is actually Castilian or Castellano, spoken in Madrid, in Castile, but it's not the same as Catalan spoken in Aragon, or Aragonese in Aragon, and Catalan in Barcelona, or Basque language in northern Spain, the indigenous Basque language in northern Spain, or there's a lot of different languages even in Spain itself. Even in the US, we all speak English, but we also have our own languages. So being multilingual is not a barrier. Yes, Europe thrived despite having multiple languages. Even Italians have multiple. There's actually there used to, well, I'm not sure now, but there used to be a lot more languages in Italy than Italian. Italian was actually the dialect or the language that was spoken in Florence before it became the Italian for everyone in Italy. Okay, I just need to use the CR really quick, so I'm gonna be right back. And yes, please send your comments in the or chat, your comments in the chat, your questions about about this topic or any of the topics that was brought up in the video. I'll be right back. Hi, I'm back. What did I miss? Let's put water as a background since we talked about water. Water. Cool. I'm glad you brought this up. So Ivan Reyes said that what I think is missing from the Philippines and Japan comparison is that Japan is connected, more contiguous, and with its four major islands compared to the Philippines. That is true. They had that as an advantage. Um, yes, so I agree with this too. Philippine schools should teach Austronesian history and or Austronesian prehistory and start Philippine history from the year 900 with Laguna Copper Plate, 1300s, 1500s, because these are all lacking in schools right now. Or if anything, they're barely mentioned. Okay, so I think I missed a lot of comments. I'm just catching up. Sige, sige. Ano bang pwedeng pag-usapan na nabanggit na? Okay, Shade Gray is saying that there seems to be a trend in the Anglosphere, the English-speaking world, where our growing number of people are growing up monolingual, and that is not good. That is true. I can see that trend. Or just this seems to be, at least from what we see in the mainstream media and in the social media, there's a lot of people who seem to be against, or discriminate on people who can speak more than one languages. That is sad. And it's also a trend in the Philippines. Back then, people in the Philippines are very multilingual. Now it's kind of frowned upon, um, in a way. A lot of people make fun. Actually, I do lectures about this, but I don't want to go into tangent about lectures or lecturing, giving you a lecture. But for example, when I was in schools in the Philippines, when I was in grade school in the Philippines, if we more than half the subjects were taught in English, and then the other half are taught in Filipino or Tagalog. So if you're in the English subjects or the subjects that was taught in English, like math or science, and you spoke Tagalog, then you get punished for speaking Tagalog. And it's the same. I mean, if in it's even worse if you speak a language other than Tagalog. Like if you spoke Kapampangan, you get penalized. Um, and no, you can actually pay a fee as a student. You pay like a 1 peso for every non-Tagalog, non-English word you speak in class, and that's sadly, when I went to the Philippines, a lot of people are saying that it is sadly still true. Okay. Okay. Yeah, so accents and dialects are all different. That is true. In every province, the Tagalog is different. Yes. So that's actually, for example, the Tagalog, since we're talking about languages, a lot of people have been asking what's the difference between a dialect and a language. There's one way to test it. It's like, if you understand each other. So if, for example, or anyways, examples of Tagalog dialects in the Philippines would be the Tagalog spoken in Manila is very different from the Tagalog spoken in Bulacan, Tagalog spoken in Batangas, in Laguna, in Cavite. And these are dialects of Tagalog. But for example, Ilocano is not a dialect of Tagalog because it's its own language. Same with Cebuano and Kapampangan and other languages in the Philippines. Um, did I miss things? Okay, so yeah, I'll read Calories' comment. Ilocos has a very good economy, and blah, blah. Pampanga has a very good medical schools and hospitals, but many cannot migrate to these places because of the language barrier. Instead of forcing others to speak one language, we should make more of an effort to speak other languages from the country, from within the Philippines. We have other thriving cities and many in the Philippines that, it's not just Manila. That is true. If you go to Cebu, it's very thriving. If you go to Davao, um, Iloilo is very clean and thriving. So there's a lot of, sadly, Yeah, sadly, just to give an example, in Pampanga, since we're so close to Manila, we're actually losing more Kapampangan speakers. So a lot of the establishments in Angeles City, for example, the biggest city in Pampanga, are now, would not serve you if you don't speak Tagalog to them. So there's a lot of incidents where it's a rising number of incidents where older Kapampangans, for example, would go to a restaurant and would order in Kapampangan. They would actually not serve them because they would have them, they would want them to speak Tagalog instead of Kapampangan, even though you're in Angeles at the very center of Kapampangan speaking people. But yeah, we should make more of an effort to understand each other's languages instead of forcing everybody to speak Tagalog, for example. Okay, there's a couple of questions that I kind of missed. Um, I think I lost it. Okay. Patrick saying, I hope we at Kirby make a video. I can't learn how to vote wisely. I'm just a new voter and like the past, future matters. Yes, that is true. So yeah, it's there's something being planned for the upcoming elections, but no details yet. Yes, so yes, it is great that Tagalog is taught in the Philippines, but definitely should have pride in the native languages as well. Don't shame or punish people for speaking their native language. And if you look at the timeline of when they started, it started during the American period, or when we started shaming people for speaking their mother tongues, because at least the Spaniards made an effort to learn the different languages in the Philippines. Okay. Okay. But yeah, I'm not sure if I was able to share all of my thoughts. Probably not. I don't think I was able to share everything that I thought about the video that we just watched earlier. But yes, I'll be making a video about it, so stay tuned. Um, okay, we have. Oh, man. Oh yeah, it is midnight in the East Coast. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for watching. Yes. Good night, and thank you for watching. I'm gonna head to bed soon too. I need to wake up early. Okay, ano pa ba yung mga na-miss ko? We should change the meaning of Filipino language instead of being another word for Tagalog. Great idea. Good afternoon kay XCM Lanuza. Hello. Hi. Okay, so Mel 666 Mellow Death saying that about the geography of the Philippines being battered by natural disasters year round can be disadvantageous, but the Philippines was very prosperous back then. That is true. And again, because our ancestors knew how to take care of Mother Nature and knew how to follow the cycle, if you know what I'm trying to say. Okay. I'm trying to scroll up the other comments that I might have missed. Ayun. So this is a question from Arian Hilario earlier that I missed. Totoo po bang Islam ang religion sa bansa? Or I guess the question is if oh yeah, so if it's Islam is the first religion in the Philippines. No, it's not. the so before Islam, there's already Hindu Buddhist influences in the Philippines, as you can see in the Golden Tara, for example, that was found in Mindanao. Yeah, it's not. But if there was a question earlier on when Islam came to the Philippines, it's around the late 1300s. The earliest known Muslim missionary to arrive in the Philippines was from the late 1300s, 1380, if I'm not mistaken. Um, yes. So the first, well, it's hard to determine what's the first language or the first religion in the Philippines is, because organized religion is very is new. Before this, a lot of the organized religion are actually from the Middle East, if you think about it, and our ancestors before being exposed to these other religions had their own indigenous beliefs that are very fluid, if I'm making sense. Yeah, so we had our own deities, and the thing is, if you watch my video last year on the coming of Christianity in the Philippines, about the first baptism, you'll see how, or I mentioned it there, that our ancestors, when there's a new religion, they actually, there's a word, syncretism. Nabubulong ako whenever I say this. They syncretized religion. When they adopt elements from the new religion that they learned, and add it on to another layer of their own beliefs. So, very fluid ang paniniwala ng ating mga ninuno sa Pilipinas at sa Timog Silangang Asya noong unang panahon. Um, Yes, so in many ways, organized religion is a concept that was forced, I'm just reading comment. Organized religion, organized religion that was, a concept that was forced by Western colonizers in the Philippines. That is true. Okay. Okay, so it seems odd from Miguel Vina that the Philippines is the only Spanish colony that does not use Spanish anymore. More Iberian colonies use either Spanish or Portuguese. Some of them did include their native languages. So historically speaking, Spanish was still taught until the 80s in the Philippines. My own grandpa, my own lolos taught Spanish in college in the Philippines. Um, and But the thing is, historically speaking, too, is that Spanish was never widely spoken in the Philippines because the Philippines was the farthest colony in terms of from Spain in terms of traveling from Madrid to the Philippines. It took them months or even half a year back, way back then, as opposed to reaching Mexico or Peru or Venezuela, where they are closer to Spain. So there was more migration of Spanish speakers in the Americas compared to the Philippines. So that's one reason why Spanish is not spoken in the Philippines anymore, because we never had that much Spanish speakers to begin with in the Philippines. And then, unknown to a lot of people, actually, when World War II hit the Philippines, when World War II erupted, a lot of the Spanish speaking people in the Philippines actually left the Philippines to migrate to safer countries like Venezuela. I have my own Lola's cousins. Um, our Spanish side of the family, the Spaniards in our family, migrated to Venezuela and back to Spain during World War II because it was relatively safer compared to the Philippines, which is being bombarded by the Japanese and the Americans. So yeah, that's another reason why there's first there's already very little Spanish speakers in the Philippines to begin with, and then World War II happened. Oh, hold on, let me backtrack. So first, throughout the 300 years of Spanish colonization in the Philippines, there's already only a few Filipinos or people in the Philippines who spoke Spanish. And then when after Philippine Revolution, after the Philippine American War, a lot of them left to go back to Spain. And then so a lot of them left, and then whoever was left after that also left after World War II or during World War II. So those are some reasons why Spanish never took root or never became widespread in the Philippines compared to other countries that were also colonized by Spain. I hope that made sense for folks who are asking this question. Okay, so back to geography or the natural disasters. Calubis is saying architecture is a very good way to combat natural disasters. Cities in the Philippines hasn't been as great at that. The Spanish understood our geography than us now. That is true. So during the Spanish colonial period, Philippine, I'll just read this comment. I was going to say this too, but Philippine Baroque churches are built in a way to combat earthquakes and typhoons. We should take some inspiration from this instead of making more skyscrapers. Yeah, so it is true that during Spanish colonialism, or actually not just that, even before colonialism, our architecture in the Philippines um, was more in tune with nature and natural disaster compared to our architecture today, which is very very Americanized actually, if you think about it, and very um, modernized in a way that is really um, not really, what do you call this, in sync with the the nature around us in the Philippines. Oh yeah, so this is also true. The Americans prohibited the Spanish language, and replaced it with English. Yes, it is also true that Spanish was not standardized back then. Okay, okay. Going back to the topic of the video earlier. The funny thing is that they don't also say that Indonesia is also doomed in geographically. Well, maybe he'll make a video, about it. But yeah, yes. In many ways, Indonesia is a much larger Philippines. Supersized Philippines. Like twice as much, more than twice as much islands, more than three times the languages, or more than three times the islands, or and then more than, yeah. Anyways, you get my point. Okay, another point brought up in the geography in video: Philippines being main disconnected islands doesn't affect economy that much. Indonesia is one of the leading economies despite having more islands. That is true. Again, in the video, having many islands was painted as this really bad thing for the Philippines, when actually it's not. And if you go back to before colonialism, it's precisely, you know because of that diversity. My point is, the Philippines, Indonesia, all these countries in Southeast Asia were very integrated with one another. We're very interconnected with one another before colonialism. And if you think about it, a lot of the borders that separates the people in Southeast Asia today are created during colonialism. So back then, there was, people are more free to travel. People are more connected to one another. So if you think about it, today we think of the Philippines having not much in not having much in common with Indonesia, but we actually do. So if you're getting what I'm trying to say, is that before colonialism, it is not true that the islands of the Philippines, the islands of Indonesia, of Southeast Asia were disconnected from one another. They were never isolated from one another. They have always been interconnected. And it's also true that we have denser populations relative to landmass. And the thing too that I wanted to say is, apart from producing fertile land, these islands, because of their position in the volcanic, or no, not volcanic, the Pacific Ring of Fire, results in a lot of minerals and resources in Southeast Asia. Okay, hey, salamat kay TJ Austria. Thank you for this discussion, and look forward to watching more videos about our history culture. I have to go back to work now. Yay! Thank you for joining us during your break from work. Maraming salamat. Okay. Dennis, yes, Curators, a living archive of Baybayin in USD, should make a video. Apparently, the Spanish knows to write as well. Yes, actually, for example, when it comes to Baybayin, a lot of the reason we know about Baybayin is because the Spaniards learned Baybayin and they recorded it for us. um, in a way, the Spaniards played a big part in preserving baybayin. Yeah. So yeah, that is true. Yes, thank you for bringing this up, Calories. It is true. Tama. If you look at Filipino print art, yung mga painting ng mga Pilipino noong 1800s from the late Spanish era, you can see that a lot of the clothing of Filipinos back then are still very similar to what the Indonesians and Malaysians or that back then would still wear during their colonial period. And since you mentioned that, this is my thing too. Let's go on a tangent here. So I did architecture before in college. Then I did a lot of majors. I was, long story short, I've been also passionate about architecture since I was a little kid. Anyways, when we look at architecture of the Philippines, people always associate bahay na bato in the Philippines, for example, that style of architecture as very colonial. They always think of, because it happened during colonial period, so they always think that that architecture is Spanish architecture. It's not, because even if you look at colonial architecture in Mexico, in California, in Peru, they're not the same. But if you look at the architecture in Malaysia, in Indonesia, during the same period when we had Bahay na Bato, it's similar. Bahay na Bato in the Philippines is an architecture that was, developed in the Philippines, particularly by our people. It's not a Spanish architecture. It just so happened that it was developed during colonial period. But if you look at the trend, it's the same as the traditional houses in Malaysia, in Indonesia. Yes. Yeah, so it is, it's not Spanish. It has more in common with, if anything, on the surface it may seem Spanish, but if you actually look at the construction, the different parts of it, it's closer to the traditional architecture in Southeast Asia than those in Europe. So yes, Bahay na Bato is a native architecture, not a Spanish one. But of course, there's some Spanish elements into it. Kumbaga, Spanish surface lang siya. Yes, tama. Like what Miguel's saying, our architecture is closer to that of Thailand, Vietnamese, or Indonesian than Mexican. Spanish architecture is more bricks and shorter. And some of the roofs are not even, pointed. Hopefully you can make a video about, yes, I'd love to. I'd love to do that. It's on my list. Okay, maybe I'll stay for like maybe 19 more minutes, and then I'll have to log off now. So, any last comments? Oops. Okay, Mintramos already existed. Taken by the Spanish, does this mean a lot of other forts in the Philippines could be pre-colonial? In many ways, yes. So yeah, not well. Again, the Intramuros was built on top of the pre-colonial walls of Manila. Other fortified cities back then in the Philippines include Cainta. They had their own fortifications before being colonized. And in Pampanga, places like Betis. In Pampanga, was it Betis in Lubao? Lubao was the other one in Pampanga that was recorded to be heavily fortified. It actually, after the Spanish took Manila, it actually took them more than a year before they were able to come back to conquer Betis and Lubao because of how heavily fortified they were compared to other places in the Philippines. So those are two examples in Luzon that I can think of. And of course, if you look at the name alone, Cotabato literally means stone fort. So yeah. I hoped you could make a video about natural disaster and how Filipinos used it to our advantage. That's I mean, it's or well, what I'm trying to say is that what I wrote to be the formal video reaction to this disaster or geography or doomed how geography doomed the Philippines reaction, my official reaction, the one I wrote on my notebook, actually has elements of that. I just wasn't able to film it and record it and edit it yet because I'll be traveling to see family. But I will make that when I get back after seeing my grandparents. Okay, let me highlight this comment because I do agree with this. If you look at our churches, they already look like temples. If you look at the church from Ilocos, Paway. Was it Paway? It looks like Hindu temple. It's not the vegan church. It's the Paway, yeah. Paway Church in Ilocos is the one that looks more similar to the temples in Southeast Asia. Yeah, so it looks like a Hindu temple from Indonesia. Yeah, it has elements similar to Borobudur in Indonesia. So yeah, it's Paway Church in Ilocos. And even churches in Pampanga, you'll see the nagas, the dragons, carved into the temples, not temples, into the churches in Pampanga, reminiscent of the pre-colonial temples and architecture that our ancestors had. Okay, Las Piñas local historian. Yay, salamat. Ancient port in the Philippines like Sulu and Manila. I think this is a follow-up to something. But yeah, Sulu and Manila were thriving ports before colonialism. Okay. Did I miss more comments? Should revive pre-colonial fashion, maybe add modern twist to it. You can't buy them anywhere unless it's custom. Yes, that is true. Yeah, you can start by wearing, the modern day malongs that we have. But also be careful not to appropriate other cultures. Yes, I'm really sad that we are never included in the histories of Indonesia, Malaysia, and Brunei. But to be fair, we also don't include them in our history. That's because of colonialism and colonial miseducation. But yeah, actually, when I started my channel, it was actually to show more of how connected the histories were of the Philippines, Indonesia, Southeast Asia, not just Indonesia and the Philippines. Let me repeat that. When I first started my history videos on my channel, it was really to show how the deeper connections between the histories of Southeast Asia, from the Philippines to Thailand to Indonesia to Laos to Vietnam to Brunei to Malaysia to East Timor. That was the real. Those are my original vision for my channel. But through the last couple of years, of course, since a lot of my viewers were from the Philippines, so the topics gravitated more towards the Philippines. But I do plan on making more Southeast Asian history videos to show more, or to show how much more we are connected. Okay. That's also true. We don't even teach the Spanish attempt to colonize Cambodia. The bulk of the army were the Philippines. It shows that even during the Spanish era, we were still involved in Southeast Asian history. Yes. Actually, there's if you go to Indonesia, if you look at Indonesian history, there's what they call the Pampangers, from the Dutch word for Kapampangans, Pampangers. And they were the descendants of the Kapampangan soldiers that were stationed in Indonesia by the Spaniards at first, and then later on they were employed by the Dutch. So yeah, even in this, as late, if I'm not mistaken, as late as the 1900s, the unit of the Dutch unit in or the Dutch um, auxiliary unit that includes Kapampangans or Pampangers existed until the 1900s, if I'm not mistaken. Because let me actually search it. Pampangers. It's a picture. I can't find the picture anymore. Anyways, there's a unit of Kapampangan soldiers in Indonesia as part of the Dutch colonialism in Indonesia up until the 1900s. Yes, like what Miguel's saying, even Spanish pronunciation of the Moluccas is not being taught. Yes, at one point, the Moluccas, the Spice Islands, was also part of the Spanish East Indies. And yeah, I'm not sure the connection between the Philippines and the Moluccas dates back before colonialism. Um, there's a lot of, forgotten pre-colonial connections. If we actually look at the oral traditions of Luzon, because sorry if I'm talking about Luzon again, but that's my research focus and expertise in many ways. The royal families of Luzon before colonialism were actually related to the royal families of Ternate in Moluccas, the big sultanate in the Moluccas, apart from being related to Sulu and Brunei. Yes, while working in Singapore, that's the time I realized Filipinos are closely connected to Malaysians and Indonesians, from language to food to appearance. Yes. Yeah. Okay. We got about a few more minutes, or 10 more minutes. Excuse me. Okay, illustrations PH, that's how you say it. Illustrations or illustrations. Kuya, request a whole video about the royal families in the Philippines, with family trees. Please, really want to have a clear idea. Maybe I'm not. Well, I'll try to make a family tree, but it's complicated family trees. But yeah, there is a channel, Useful Charts, that does that for a Western or mostly the mainstream, like history, family trees. But yes, I'll try. Somebody actually offered to help me make the family trees, but yes, the thing is, it's so a lot of it is so unclear because of lost records and forgotten histories. But anyways, yes, I can make that video. Mm, Okay. Gawa ka ng video about pre-Austronesian Philippines. That's kind of hard because even the prehistory of the Austronesians in the Philippines is still not 100% clear. So maybe in the future, but I'm not gonna give any promises kasi masyado mahirap yun. Very little yung alam natin before Austronesians came to the Philippines. Ay, Lobat na yung mga ilaw ko. Okay, Calabis is saying, we've always understood that we were connected to Southeast Asia, especially with Malaysia and Indonesia, which is where the Mafalindo became, why, or no, the Mafalindo thing became a thing, but for some reason the majority of us don't know that history. That is true. Comment, weren't a lot of historical documents destroyed when the British invaded Manila? Yes. So there's a lot of like destruction of Manila that caused, or yeah. So when the British invaded Manila, the fires, the burning of Manila back then, destroyed a lot of the historical documents, destroyed and looted a lot of the historical documents of the Philippines. And then after that, also the World War II, when World War II ravaged Manila, whatever survived from the British invasion also disappeared because of World War II. So sadly, a lot of our archives have been lost. Yes, because of Mafalindo, we were able to create ASEAN. Not just Mafalindo and Seattle, the Southeast Asian Treaty Organization. These all lead to what we now have, ASEAN. Okay, so let me answer this. I first gained interest about the royal families when I watched the video of Hara Humamay and Putri Leda Mentionai, who are their parents. I'm not sure about Hara Humamay, it's not actually recorded. But Putri Leda Mentionai's father is the son of the first Sultan of Sulu. Quick answer to your question. Do you think movies, art, music would be best way to educate Filipinos who people in Philippines? In a way, it's a great way of teaching them since a lot of them are exposed to mass media. But it's not the only way. For me, I don't see anything as the best way to do something, but everything contributes to the bigger goal. And this is a great way to. What I'm trying to say, it's a great way to teach them. Sige, I have to go soon. So, any last minute comments and questions? Thank you for staying behind the last 2 hours and a half. Hara Humamay, doesn't that mean Queen of Rice? Because Humay means rice grain in Bisaya. Well, sorry, I don't speak Bisaya, or I don't know much about the etymology of Hara Humamay's name. In some traditions, she was referred to as Hara Amihan. So, yeah, I'm not sure what her name Humamay comes from. Maybe our Visayan historians can, enlighten us about this. Colonization made Filipinos think and feel that our history starts with Magellan and no prior histories or stories, and the same idea is taught in our schools. Sadly, to this day, a lot of people still think this. Actually, a lot of the comments, hateful comments on my videos, are because of that. They're like, oh, that's not true, you're just making it up. Just curious, but was there any contact with Filipinos and Chamorros during pre-colonial times? This is not something that I'm knowledgeable about, but we'll have to ask our Chamorro historians. But it also depends on which part of history, because if we're thinking about way back, then the ancestors of the Chamorro people came from the Philippines, thousands of years ago during the Great Austronesian Migration. So I'm not sure how much of that connection they kept through the centuries before colonialism. Cool. So again, I will be making a formal video about how geography doomed the Philippines reaction. This is more of like a fun live stream with all of you, since I won't be able to make a video this week. But stay tuned. Maybe next week I'll publish that video. because I actually wrote my script in this notebook, but I was not able to film it yet because I'll be traveling to see my grandparents. Okay. Let me check something really quick. Mayon Go is saying volcanoes on mythologies. Yeah, I can do more of that. I started that when Mayon erupted a few years ago, but I can definitely do more of the mythologies around the different volcanoes in the Philippines. Yeah, because for example, like I mentioned or I kind of hinted on this in the Mayon video and also in the Dragons video, Mount Pinatubo and Mount Arayat, these two mountains in Central Luzon have there's a lot of mythology surrounding them about the twin deities, the twin diwatas, Sinukuan of Mount Arayat and Apong Malyari or Namalyari or Mayari of Pinatubo, for example. That's an example. And then of course in the Visayas we have Mount Canlaon. Yeah, there's a lot of mythologies about our volcanoes. Okay, yes, Glenn. Thank you, Glenn. Maraming salamat. Thank you. Go to sleep. It's already past 1 a.m. there. Thank you for joining us. And thank you, Asian Toast. Hope you well on your way to see your grandparents. God bless and goodbye. Thank you. Salamat. I see a lot of comments about TV shows. But yeah, hopefully there's more of TV shows that accurately depicts our culture and histories. It doesn't have to be 100% accurate historically speaking, but if the elements of the culture are accurately portrayed, that's good enough. But of course, the more the better. Kuya, do you speak Ilocano? Unfortunately, I don't. I know a few phrases from my stepdad, but I don't speak Ilocano. Thank you. I love your videos or the video about the Philippine dragons, especially the illustrations. Thank you. Salamat. I actually, there's a what do you call this? There's a coloring book that comes with it. So for those who like those illustrations, the coloring book is going to be out soon, the physical one. But if you cannot wait, you want the digital copy of the coloring book, you can also purchase it now, and you can use the code that you see scrolling down below for 15% off. Yeah. And let me know too if you want a Tagalog version of the Dragons video. I also plan on doing that. I just don't have time this week to do those videos. Oops, sorry. Salamat kay Ariel Marjo. Stay healthy, Kirby, and more videos to come. Yes, thank you. Hopefully, more videos to come. I plan on doing that. Thank you. Thanks for your time, Kuya. Stay safe on your trip. Thank you. Salamat din. I'll do my best to stay safe. I'm careful naman when it comes to traveling in this time of COVID. Okay, let me answer this. Some Filipinos said we must erase Spanish remnants in our culture. What's your opinion in this about this? I don't think we should erase it. And people mistaken or often mistake that when I say decolonize, it means we should erase the influence of the Spanish colonialism in the Philippines. But that's not how you look at history. If when I say decolonize, it means looking at putting it into context, understanding it in context. Nah, yeah. So it doesn't. I'm not saying that we should erase Spanish history or the part the influence of the Spaniards in the Philippines, but we should put it into context why they did it, when they did it, how it affected our people, and how it changed our perspective about our own ancestors. So it doesn't mean we should erase it. I don't think we should erase it. If anything, we should really study it more to really understand our people, because that's still part of our history. That's still part of our people's experiences and what leads to us today. Um, Okay, thank you for your wonderful and educative video, especially the language versus dialects fight. Thank you. That's an old video. Thank you. What's my email address? It's on my thing, but I'll put it here. See, yeah, my full name. Yeah, right there. If you're interested in emailing me. Baka naman may Shopee, wala pa. But hopefully soon, meron ng distributors sa Pilipinas. Ayan, si Hermana Ana de la Cruz. Welcome. Paalis na ako pero maraming salamat. Makasaysayang araw din sa inyo. Na-disconnect ako. Sorry, pasensya na. Han Paul, more power to, wala. More power to your channel. We really need to have this kind of channels where we relearn and be educated on our history as Filipinos and as members of the Southeast Asian family. Thank you. Yes, so hopefully my videos help in reconnecting our Southeast Asian roots that a lot of us have forgotten. Oh no, sabi ni Illustrations PH, insert ko lang, dalawang tertial lang nakita ko, na nakita after ni Odette. Oh no, I hope they're okay. Cool, thanks, Shade Gray. Decolonization refers to the overcoming of the colonial influences brought in to keep people subservient. Yeah, thank you. That's what it is. Not about erasing. Okay, I'm gonna be heading out soon, but okay, let me highlight this too. Remember, Mindanao is a diverse place and cultures overlap each other. Yes, Mindanao is actually one of the more diverse parts of the Philippines. Maraming salamat, everybody. Yes, I thought about it too. I forgot to take it out or take it apart yet. Yes. Pinoy ka talaga kasi nakatayo pa rin ang Christmas tree mo. Yes. Merry Christmas. How about Atlantis? Atlantis is from the Greeks. We don't really know where Atlantis is. It's It's a long story, but you can look it up. The Minoans might have actually been the people they referred to about Atlantis. But anyways, yeah, salamat din sa stream. Salamat din sa pagsama niyo sa akin, pagsali niyo sa aking live stream reaction sa video how the geography doomed the Philippines. Ulit, gagawa ko ng mas formal na video, animated and slides about this topic. So stay tuned for that. Abangan. It is true. What I forgot to mention is not all what is now the Philippines was colonized by the Spanish. So, the vast majority of Mindanao was never colonized by the Spaniards, except for the small cities and forts scattered different parts. But overall, Mindanao was never colonized by the Spaniards until the Philippine-American War. Shade Racing, I think Homer was just high when he wrote about Atlantis. Yeah, there's a lot of videos tackling this history behind Atlantis, so you can search it up. If you look at the ones made by the Overly Sarcastic Production or OSP, I suggest you should watch that if you want to learn more about Atlantis. Yeah, so I heard Atlantis was inspired by the eruptions of Santorini. Yes, I heard that too. And also the cultures of the Minoans. Thank you so much for Kirby for this live stream discussion. Maraming salamat po. That video was provocative. Yes. Okay, sige. Is that Atlantic is from Atlantic Ocean. Atlantic Ocean was named after the mythology of Atlantis. Okay, we should also remember that we did not exactly went to war with Spain. There are battles, but we made deals with the Spaniards. Most of the wealthy people during the Spanish era were principales. Yes, that is also part of our history that we should recognize. Yeah, in many ways too, the deals were also the thing too with these deals is that when you look at the surviving records we have are from the Spanish perspectives. It's not from the perspectives of our ancestors who made the deals with the Spaniards. So it's also incomplete if you think about it. For example, fun fact: people always make fun of the kings of Manila, particularly Raja Matandá and Raja Sulaiman, for allegedly surrendering easily to the Spaniards and signing a deal with them. But if you actually look at what was recorded, even the Spaniards themselves recorded that Raja Matanda did not even want to do the blood compact with the Spaniards to seal the deal. He didn't even want to seal the deal, if that made sense. So it's a lot of missing information. But yeah, it's more complicated than just black and white invasion. Actually, some of my upcoming videos are about how let me look at the list that I listed for this year. Some of the list of videos that I have this year are one World One coming soon is Europeans and the Spice Islands. You know what led them to conquering the Philippines and Southeast Asia and Latin America. And then there's also a video coming up about how Spain conquered the Visayas. That's a video too. Another one is how Spain conquered Luzon. And then the other one is how Sulu and Mindanao resisted colonialism. So those are some of the videos coming up this coming months. And not just that, I also plan on making similar videos on how the British took Sabah and Sarawak or North Borneo. How the Portuguese lost Southeast Asia, or how the Dutch colonized Indonesia, how the British colonized Malaysia, how the Dutch tried to steal the Philippines from Spain. So these are all video topics I have listed for this year. Yeah. I guess I'll stay for 15 more minutes. Gawin na natin saktong 3 oras. Okay, question. Did Raja Matandá and Lakandúlâ convert to Catholicism? On the record, they did, according to the Spaniards, but we're not really sure how that played out, if they actually practice it. I doubt that they practice that, because if you actually the reason, for example, why Agustin de Legazpi, a nephew of Raja Matandá and Lakandúlâ, was imprisoned right before the Tondo conspiracy or the revolt of the Lakans in 1588, was that he buried his mother following the Muslim rites. So he got in jail. He was imprisoned because of that. So in many ways, a lot of them, on paper, on the surface, converted to Catholicism, but they still kept their pre-colonial beliefs. Like, for example, again, in the case of Agustin de Legazpi, Islamic rites in terms of burying his mother that led him to prison. Yeah, so I doubt that they actually converted. So they converted on the surface in name, but not in practice. In my opinion, that's most likely what happened. Okay. Hopefully that answered the question. Yes, what Calobi said. Each ethnic group in the Philippines had a different relationship with the Spanish. Yeah. And they were good, or the Spaniards were good at pitting everybody against each other. Okay. Kung wala nang tanong, I'll be heading out soon. Sino pa bang nandito? Sige, last bye, sabi ni Mayon Go. Aiden, I'm not sure. Actually, I'm not sure. I'm not as well versed in Visayan culture as I'd like to be. So I don't know if they have Caris or Chris or Calis similar to what they had in Luzon and or Manila, Central Luzon and Mindanao. Philippines during the Cold War is also a good topic. Yeah, but let me finish the earlier ones first. Maybe we'll get there one day. Naabot po ba ng baybayin scripts ang Mindanao? Mindanao had their own writing systems that they used because of their integration with the Muslim world. So they had their own. It's not baybayin. Or not even connected to baybayin. Ano pa ba? Yes, besides definitely have Cambrilians and Kalasag shields. Yes. Yes, Kirim is the script that was used in parts of Mindanao. There's more than this Kirim, there's another one. Yeah. The Jawi script was also used in Mindanao. I think they did kasi nakita ko sa museum dito sa Tagbilaran. Meron mga weaponry pero di ko lang alam ano name. Okay, thanks for sharing. I'd love to visit the museum in Tagbilaran. Are there other old writings like the Laguna Carpet Plate inscription in the NASA Museum in terms of similar to Laguna Carpet Plate, the same script? None that we're aware of yet. So far, we haven't found any other. Unfortunately, we haven't found other artifacts that is exactly the same script as Laguna Carpet Plate. There's the Kalatagan jar from Batangas that hasn't been translated yet. So there's that. Yeah. So unfortunately, very little of our archaeological or artifacts survived through the centuries. Do Muslim people in the south still have old rituals that they had before Islam? I cannot speak for them, but maybe we can ask the culture bearers from Mindanao. I do know that a lot of, like, for example, the Singkil dance is pre-colonial, or not pre-colonial, pre-Islam, and it's from the Hindu Buddhist traditions of Mindanao before Islam came along, um, from the epic Ramayana, or the epic from the Rangan epic of the Banana people that led to Singkil was from the Hindu epic Ramayana. But anyways, I'm not the expert person to give an answer to this question. I will defer to the culture bearers in Mindanao. I mean, I have an idea of the answer, but I'd rather have them answer it para mas accurate ang sagot. Okay, sige, last 10 minutes. For reals. Is there a petition getting back Filipino gold and artifacts back to the Philippines? I'm not sure, but there's actually a lot of the golden artifacts that are still in the Philippines, luckily. But although, of course, there's still, for example, the golden Tara in the Fields Museum in Chicago. But yeah, I'm not sure if there's a big petition right now. I'm not aware of it, if anything. Maybe meron, pero wala akong, hindi ako aware. Do you think that Devi's and I guess divide and conquer narrative gives the Spanish a little bit too much credit instead of ethnic groups being ambitious? Um, well, in terms of this, what I'm trying to say is that they were very effective in applying that divide and conquer and playing that ambitions from the different ethnic groups in the Philippines. So yes, it's a little bit of both. Yeah, so there are elements that that were there that would naturally divide the different ethnic groups in the Philippines. So talibong. There's actually two different types of talibong. So I'm not. How do I? I don't know. I'm not sure how to describe talibong from the Visayas because the talibong in the Visayas is different from, for example, in Kapampangan, Kampilan is actually known as talibong. So there's an interesting etymology in how talibong refers to two types of different swords in the Visayas and a different sword in Pampanga. But yeah. So did Austronesians enslave Negritos or the Aitas? That's I guess before colonialism we don't actually know if they did, but during colonialism there's a lot of instances where the Spaniards encouraged lowland Austronesians to enslave and capture the indigenous Aitas in the Philippines. So you can see that in how they what do you call this? They encourage a lot of early colonial Filipinos or the Austronesian speaking Filipinos in enslaving and capturing Aitas, for example. So before colonialism, we don't actually know. I'm not saying they didn't. I'm not saying they did, but we don't know. We don't have a record that survives if they did. Unlikely, according to Dennis. There's actually a lot more. From what I know, there was a lot more friendly relations between, for example, the Kapampangas of Central Luzon and the Aitas before colonialism. There was a lot of exchanges, even in the language, in the mythology. We shared a lot with the Aitas in Central Luzon. For example, in Apong Malyari in Kapampangan is Apo na Malyari amongst the Aitas is the same deity. But yeah. I am from Iriga City po kasi we live near them. Malaki po ang prejudice against them. Yes. Unfortunately, there's a lot of prejudice against the Aitas and the Atis, the Aitas, the different Negrito people in the Philippines. Yeah, sadly. There's still a lot of prejudice today. Yes, so yeah, talibong in the Visayas is from Panay, or mostly used in Panay, in a clan. Tama, mukha siyang leaf-like blade and slender and more longer than the barong sword. But yeah. Yeah, I'm still like interested to learn why Kapampangan is called Kampilan Talibong. But then again, Kampilan back then used to refer to any large swords. Sige, na pa pang last 5 minutes, people. So there's a comment. Asan na yun? I'm not really an expert about this, but from what I know, Melanesians, the Aita people, for example, are not are their own thing, separate from folks in Africa. Agusan had a tribal, yes, Agusan had a tribal civilization back then. Butuan is in that part. And Butuan is one of the oldest known kingdoms in the Philippines that traded with China, with Champa, in different parts of the Philippines and Southeast Asia. There's a comment about Subranabumi, or the Golden Land, the land of gold, being the Philippines. The thing is that this term was used to refer to a lot of places in Southeast Asia, so not just the Philippines. If you actually look at it, it usually refers to, it was used to refer to Cambodia, for example, to Thailand, to Sumatra, so not just the Philippines. So hindi conclusive yung theory na yun. If anything, baka yung buong Southeast Asia kasi hindi lang sa Pilipinas maraming ginto sa Southeast Asia. So let's not be exclusive like that. Hindi lang tayo. And again, these modern-day borders ng Pilipinas at ibang bahagi ng Southeast Asia are modern-day creations dahil sa colonialism. Ano pa ba? Ay, 2 minutes na lang pala. Last 2 minutes. Yes, Agusan culture is super unique. I wonder how Agusan culture is connected to Surigao. We'll have to ask the experts in that. Okay, back to the video. If we didn't have a thriving river, the Agusan River is still thriving today. That many tribes still live in the Agusan River. Yes, good point. Maybe I'll include that. Let me write that down. Maybe I'll include that in the more formal video reaction that I'll be making. Thanks, Calories. Sige. Maraming salamat. Oh, yay, mayroon pa palang 41 people joining us right now. 40 na lang. 41 ulit. May bumalik. But yeah, thank you for joining my live stream today. My live reaction to the video, how geography doomed the Philippines. And again, I'll still make my own another separate video about it again para mas malinaw, mas concise, at mas maaaring i-share. Bye, Kuya. Thank you po. Salamat din. There are some questions that came up, but maybe okay, illustrations page, you're asking about the swords. There's a live stream that I did last month, a few weeks ago, with and a collector of traditional weapons from the Philippines, Jacob Ira. So you should watch that video to learn more about weapons in the Philippines. It's actually pretty long, so it's 4-hour live stream. So kung meron kang 4 hours to spare, you should watch it. I'll put it in the comments. And link. It's a live stream about weapons in the Philippines. So maybe that video will be able to answer your question. Technically, it's a lake, but whatever. Oh, yeah. Good point. Thank you, Dennis. Good job. Many thanks to you too. Many thanks, din. I'm happy a lot of you stayed behind. Wow, 3 hours na pala tayo. It doesn't feel like it. It feels like 2 hours. Just kidding. Okay, sige. I'll be lagging out in a little bit. Let me just make sure. Thank you. Salamat din, Illustrations PH. If you want to email me, for those who are still around, here's my email. Some people are asking how to keep in touch with me or connect with me. Takal mo namang salamat, John Suva. Thank you for this stream, Kuya. Stay safe. I'm not sure how to read this, but takala salamat din. Yeah. Salamat din kay Shade Gray, isa sa mga suki ng ating live stream, si Shade Gray. And yan, salamat. Good morning kay Ash Wang from UAE. Pasensya na, Ash Wang. I'll be logging off na. Late na dito. But yeah, actually comment pala how often you all would like me to do live streams. Daghang salamat, Kuya Kirby from Illustrations PH. Yeah, I paid for this StreamYard Pro account, so might as well use it more often. So let me know in the comments how often you would like to see 2 live streams and what topics you would like to see. Actually, bago ako umalis, what I was thinking for live stream kasi is, whenever I make a video and then I'll do a live stream answering questions about that video. For example, dahil Dragon yung last video, we can do a live stream about that too next week, or answering questions about the dragons. So let me know if that's a good idea. Like, for example, a video this week is about this topic A, and then the next live stream would be about that topic. I'll try to do weekly. Back in December, I did 3 or 4 times a week because we're trying to raise money for typhoons in the Philippines, and that was a lot. That was fun. It was really fun. Don't get me wrong, but it was a lot of I was tired every night. But yeah, maybe once a week para talking about the topics. But yeah, thank you. I'll see what I can do. Okay. Oh, cool. Thank you. Sabi ni Calories, I think streams are fun. When you did the live streams last time, I look forward for them. It's basically live Q&A, but only if you're able to. Yes. Thank you. I think live streaming would save you time when editing, but it's like having class now. Then when discussions are open. Yes, that is true. So yeah. So maybe if I don't have time to make a video, and then I'll do a live stream instead. Parang ngayon, kasi nga, diba, I was supposed to make a video about a reaction to that controversial video, but instead I did a live stream. Pero yeah, I will still make that video para mas maraming maliwanagan. And please share that video when it comes out as early as I can next week. Maybe by Monday next week, hopefully. I should be back by then. So yeah. Salamat. Oh, and if you're not part of the group yet, because of the last live stream I created from not because of it, but last live stream I made a Facebook group of all my friends, followers, and subscribers and supporters. So please join the group if you haven't joined yet, and we can continue our conversations there throughout the week. Yeah, for example, someone's asking for pre-colonial baby names in the Facebook group. So give your best pre-colonial baby names. But yeah, if you're not part of the group yet, please join the group. And I plan on being more active in the group. Yes, live streams, Q&As. Okay, sige, hanggang dito na lang. Muna. Oh wait, hold on. Maybe these reactions, live streams are pretty cool. There are a lot more videos like these that tell a very vague history of the Philippines. A lot of propaganda videos are misinformation on our history. Yes. Yeah, that is true. I also have a lot of requests to react to other videos about Philippine history. I haven't had the chance yet. But maybe that's true. Maybe I will do live streams. Like for example, yung Philippine history in 12 minutes. You can do that. You can do that as a live stream. Or yung isa pa yung Geography Now about the Philippines. I love Geography Now, so I was looking forward for their episode on the Philippines, and when it came out, I was too busy to actually be able to do a reaction. So unfortunately, I haven't really done the reaction. I haven't actually finished the video yet. So maybe I'll do that as a live stream in Geography Now kasi medyo mahaba yung episode na yun. But yeah. Salamat. Salamat sa mga suki ko sa aking live streams. Sana hindi kayo magsawa sa panonood at pagtangkilik sa aking channel. How do you say channel in Tagalog? Because in Spanish it's canal. And canal sounds very dirty and disgusting in Tagalog. Marami pa palang tao nandito. Cool, may 40 people pa na nag-stay behind. Sige. Kailangan ko na talagang umalis. Pero maraming salamat sa lahat ng sumali sa ating live stream. Chanelia. I like that, Chanelia. Kita-kits sa susunod na video at live stream. Salamat. Oh, welcome back, Anthony. Unfortunately, I have to go na. I'm just being picky with the time kasi 11 o'clock na dito. I'm trying to log off at 11:11 para lucky. Pasensya na rin sa mga technical difficulties kanina sa aking camera na bigla na lang tumigil at sa microphone na bigla na lang nag-mute. Salamat. Ingat din kayo. Oh, TV stations are called himpilan, right? TV and radio stations, himpilan. So maybe himpilan ng aking YouTube. I don't know. Maybe there's a word that we can find. But anyways, thank you. Ingat din. Salamat. Takalapungman. Kita-kits in Tagalog o Kapambangan ni Kitix and Bisaya. Kita-ita. Ingat. 1 minute na lang. One last request. Female Lakans. Yes. So I did write a book on the different queens, pre-colonial queens in Southeast Asia. So I'm also planning on doing them as a separate videos then. Actually, a big chunk of this notebook is my draft for Kayang Kalangitan. So that's an example. Yes, so salamat sa iyong request, Illustrations PH. Okay, that's it. Paalam. See you next time. Salamat.